and I love to come back. I come back to the desert anytime I can. It's like I'm a pinon pine with a long taproot that reaches clear back to my home, and that's what I live for.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 108. If you'd like more information about the podcast, it's all at the website desertladydiaries.com, and I invite you to engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries, or on Twitter at Desert Lady Diary. You may notice that the sound quality of this particular episode is a little different than most. That's because I interviewed Susan over Skype so that we could put the podcast episode out before she arrived in town to do her readings. We had a couple of technical challenges to work through before and during the interview, but we made it work, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you're in the Joshua Tree area, I hope you will come out to one of the events and see Susan, meet her, and hear her read from her books, and buy one of her books. From childhood till now, Susan Lang has run barefoot over the sands of the Mojave Desert around Pioneer Town and Yucca Valley. Susan is the author of a trilogy about a woman homesteading in the southwestern wilderness during the years 1929 to 1941. Her book, Small Rocks Rising, won the 2003 Willa Award. Her second novel, Juniper Blue, was released in 2006, and her third, Moon Lily, in fall of 2008. Susan's short stories and poems have been published in the Red Rock Review, Iris, the Idaho Review, the Raven Review, and Alligator Juniper. She was awarded a 2007 project grant from the Arizona Commission on the Arts for her novel in progress, The Sawtooth Complex. She founded and directed the Southwest Writers Series and the Hassayampa Institute for Creative Writing at Yavapai College. Susan is faculty emeritus at Yavapai College, teaches courses at Prescott College, and serves as event coordinator at Peregrine Book Company in Prescott, Arizona. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You'll be returning to the desert because you have a new book coming out called...
Right. Running Barefoot.
And where were you running barefoot in the desert?
Well, all over. I was raised up in Upper Pipes where the Wildlands Conservancy is now, and you can only walk up there. It burned that whole area in 2006, and that's when my book, The Sawtooth Complex, about that fire, I wrote that after that. And that area, and I attended a one-room schoolhouse in Pioneer Town for the first 3 years. And then later in Yucca Valley, I went to school some of the years. So I have extensive history, and I love to come back. I come back to the desert anytime I can. It's like I'm a pinon pine with a long taproot that reaches clear back to my home. And that's what I live for.
So you were born and raised here in the Pipes Canyon area.
Yeah, I was actually born in Hollywood because my dad drugged my mother away from the canyon. Her homestead cabin had burned down.
Oh, no.
So that was not a good place for a baby. So the first summer I spent in that canyon, I was 8 months old, and we did live in a tent. It's an army tent. Water was actually piped from the spring on the mountain down to the wash, and we would haul it from the wash. I don't remember that then, but I do later. And I had an interesting experience when I was 8 months old. It's a family story that I didn't hear for years, but we lay on the ground on a blanket. This was before we even had a tent, and they had raked all the pine needles and everything from that place because that was under 3 piñons. Anyway, the next morning, what they saw, there was my mom and my dad, and then me, were mountain lion tracks walking up and then over me and away. And the thing that I connect with that was I had a recurring dream until I was 6 or 7 and heard the story that I was trying to find something I could smell the breath. I could see the green eyes, and there was a big tower with a mountain lion on it. And then I noticed I had a cord in me, and I cut that cord, and that I didn't have that dream anymore. And then when I heard the story after that, I thought, ooh, that sounds like it could be, gave me the chills, because it could very well have been, I was only 8 months old, so it would be like almost pre-conscious, but not quite.
Right, and then that mountain lion could have just picked you up in its jaws and carried you right away.
Yeah, I don't know why he didn't, but, yeah, I have a feeling that I was awake and probably trying to reach for it.
Maybe, yeah. Then you grow up there in that area, attending a one-room schoolhouse. How many other students were there with you?
I think there was 12, and then it grew, or it was 16, and then it dropped till 12. Because by then we lived in an army tent, and then built a cabin. There was a house, there was a roofing done by neighbors who had to drive 8 miles up that canyon to do it. But that's the kind of community it was. But I would go down to that school and afterwards walk to Pioneer Town, where they would always be shooting one of the movies, either Roy Rogers or Gene Autry, Cisco Kid, Annie Oakley. And it actually was pretty boring because they kept doing the same thing over and over. And they both did not smell like cowboys. They smelled like perfume and makeup. And, so I'd watch for a while, and then I'd go hunt for bottles, beer bottles and Coke bottles, turn in for 2 cents a piece and get some peanuts out of the machine, wait for somebody to come pick me up. For a little while, I rode my pony to that school.
Oh, my goodness.
Which was a long way, and it kept running away with me. And I couldn't control it. It decided that it didn't want to go down there and get tied up all day. It wanted to go back where there was food and water.
Sure.
It just would turn around and run. So that didn't last very long, but it was fun while it did last.
When was the last time that you were in Pioneer Town?
March.
Oh, okay. So...
Yeah, my brother lives on Skyline Road.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Where we always used to go hunt for Indian stuff and climb the boulders. He has a place out there. We shot the cover of the book out behind his house with my granddaughter standing in as me.
Oh, I was wondering about that, because when I saw the book cover, I was like, I wonder if that's like an old superimposed picture of you, but that's really cool that it was your granddaughter. How neat.
It was my granddaughter, because the pictures, wasn't camera land out there.
Except for the movie shooting.
The movies, yeah, that's true. And every time we would take a picture, they'd make us put shoes on, dress up. So I didn't really look much like me in any of those, and they were all raggedy anyway.
Was it a case of if you didn't have shoes or didn't want to wear shoes to school, you didn't have to? Because when I had Liz Meyer from 29 Palms, and her parents were 2 of the original homesteaders out there, she said that she quickly learned that some of the kids that grew up there just didn't have shoes. So she said she learned that if she would hide her shoes behind a creosote bush, she would go to school also barefoot.
Well, I only did that when it was getting warm, They made me wear cowboy boots to school and jeans and things I never wore. So I would do as much of that. And we'd have a nice long lunchtime. So I could take them off and run around barefoot at lunchtime. And sometimes sneak in and put them under my desk, and no one paid any attention.
Right.
And then later, when I was older, like 25, my mother was horrified because I was still running around barefoot. I had 5 kids by that time. By the time I was 23, actually. And when I started college, I was a high school dropout after my freshman year. I started college, and I went barefoot to College of the Desert in Palm Desert and to the University of California in Riverside. You could do that in the late 60s and 70s,
Right, absolutely.
Right, with the hippies.
Right. The reason I asked you about when the last time you were to Pioneer Town was because I just wanted to kind of get your take on the differences of what it was like growing up there and compared to what it is now. And did you witness that process happening in cycles? Did it seem to happen all at once? What was that like?
That's a good question, and I'm trying to. It's very different because the community was real. I mean, there was Jonesy who owned the Red Dog, which burned, the real Red Dog burned down. There was the Golden Stallion Chinese restaurant that had a gold horse on the wallpaper, rearing up, which was Trigger, his horse. It was very real for weird. I thought the cowboys were kind of fake, but the people in town weren't.
Right.
Although there must have been some Hollywood influence, because I remember there was a man named Shorty with a long red beard who would dress up like a woman and sing songs with this other woman. And, so there was all kinds of stuff going on like that.
Right.
There was a tiny store that didn't have much at all. And, there was the rodeo grounds where we actually had rodeos.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was, and the bowling alley was there.
The bowling alley's back open.
Isn't that great? Do you know when I was 12, I set pins there for 25 cents a line?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I think they just opened within the last, 4 or 6 months. I haven't been in there yet. I hope to get up there soon.
I need to go check it out. I was really interested in the little museum, but I guess that closed. They're trying to find another place for it.
Right, yeah, and I never got in there either. There's so much going on here. It's hard to make the time to go out and do these things. My goodness.
A lot of people come up from the city and go there. It's kind of a hidden treasure for them.
And that's why I think it's really important. I had Gay Smith, I don't know if you know Gay. She has the property next door to Pappy and Harriet's, and she was talking about, at some point, the county was talking about paving the roads, like paving Main Street and putting in curbs and sidewalks. And apparently there was enough of a neighborhood coalition group that said, you cannot do that here.
No, that would be so bad.
So I tell everybody, every time you go to Pioneer Town, thank Gay Smith and her contingent for helping make sure that didn't happen, because it would be a totally different place now.
It would be so bad. I don't even want to think about it.
You talked earlier about not having graduated high school, but then going on down to college. So what was it that spurred you to go ahead and start taking college classes?
Well, this child got into kindergarten, and I had been reading ever since we had moved to the city. I started high school in 29 Palms, rode for the bus to 29 Palms, and I was settled in, and then my mother decided she'd move back and go back to my dad. They were always doing that. And I went down there, and I was very confused in a city, in a big, even though it was rural, there were like 3,000 kids in the high school, and
wow.
And I got all A's and took Spanish, but then they were going to make me take science over, even though I'd gotten an A, because they had driver's training in it, and they told me I couldn't take French and Spanish because they were too hard, which they weren't. So, meanwhile, I met this guy that looked like James Dean. He was a crazy guy, and we ran off to pick grapes, and I thought I'd read the Grapes of Wrath and totally missed the point. For me, it will sound like fun, and family loved each other, and he'd been in juvenile hall, stolen a car, his parents were alcoholic. It just sounded like the most romantic thing I could possibly do. So anyway, that's how I ended up. But I read the great books. It didn't take me long to realize this probably wasn't the right path. And we were very headstrong in my family. And so I was sort of waiting to the right time. And we're back out in the desert by then with him and my kids. And I just decided that I would go down to college at the desert.
And was it immediately that you decided that you wanted to be a writer?
No, I just wrote. I didn't take myself seriously because I realized it was part of at least I felt like I was part of a ongoing global dialogue with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all the, and Freud. I'd read all that stuff. I'd come across an author and then I'd read all of their stuff. But I didn't think of myself as one of them because they were all guys. They were all men. So how could I be? So I just wrote things and sometimes shared them, and sometimes I don't even know what happened to all that stuff. I wrote pretty bad poetry, And so I just went down there with my rickety old car. It was 55 miles to Palm Desert. And by the second semester, the English teacher asked me if I'd help him make comments on paper and write study questions and run discussion groups. That paid my gas, and I did that. And then someone suggested at the end of that year that I could maybe apply fill out the form and send it in to the university. And they gave me, they not only accepted me, but they gave me scholarships and stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so, it was awesome. I couldn't have gone. And then I was going 90 miles.
Right. Oh, my gosh.
But I loved it.
Yeah.
And I didn't love the community college that much because I was there to talk about all these ideas. I had no interest in getting, I hadn't even thought a degree. I just wanted to go talk about all these ideas I'd been reading about. No one else could talk to me about. And so I wandered around taking all the classes I liked and made a friend who was much more level-headed, and he and his wife would come see us out there in the desert where we lived, and pointed out to me at one point that I only had 2 or 3 classes and I could have a degree in English. And I said, English? There's a degree in English? Because it seemed like a scam. Why would I was naive to I could do the academic work. And I was Phi Beta Kappa by then, so I thought, okay. And then I had a huge auto accident on my way in to do, it was a midterm, just before I was going to graduate. And I got caught in Santa Ana. And there's a big question about why the car I had no control, hit the car on the side of the road. And I don't want to give it away because when I was writing about it, I came to a conclusion that only as a novelist this had to happen. Anyway, so I ended up unconscious for 3 days and went back. Took me a long time because it was quite a concussion.
Sure.
And my older sister, had called each of my professors, and they agreed to give me incompletes because I really was one of their star students. So finally they just said I had to write one big paper and that would do it. But it took me several months before my head would stop hurting to do that. Meanwhile, he left, and that's a whole story.
Sure.
I was so into ideas and books and literature. It just was in my blood.
Right.
My mother actually used to write a little column for the, corny column for the Pioneer Town paper. My sister wrote a book later. This was later. But so there is writing blood in the family.
Do you feel like growing up where you did was a big inspiration for the writing that you've done?
Yes, for the whole direction of my life, because the 2 things that inspired me, one was, of course, the writing, the literature and ideas, but I also loved the wild. I grew up in love with the wild land. There was a Indian called Indian George down Canyon. He drank a lot. He was a Serrano, and he lived with the Swedes. Swedes were these Swedish miners that mined the onyx mine at the end of the canyon. And they were our closest neighbors. They were 3 miles down canyon. But he used to tell me a lot about the people, because I would always find pottery, and I was wondering how did they live there without grocery stores or refrigerators, and I was always trying to chop up acorns, and I knew a few of the things like yerba senta tea and ephedra tea and lamb's quarters you could cook. So I was always trying to make stuff out of acorns and make it wrong, terrible stuff I put together. But I always loved the wild. I used to look up at the mountain and just wonder, how am I ever going to know all this? Plants and animals. Although we were pretty brutal to animals because we ate them.
That's an interesting point, because a lot of people eat meat today but have no idea how it lands in the grocery store.
Yeah,
and I think maybe if they did, things would be a little different.
Maybe, yes, because I don't eat much anymore, meat, and I'm very careful about any I eat that it comes from the right kind of places. I mean, we would shoot rabbits and have them for dinner, and a couple of times my parents shot deer that they tried to tell me was a goat, because homesteaders didn't pay attention to the seasons. So if they saw one and they could get it, it was theirs. And my mother had homesteaded up there in that canyon without a car, where she had to go shoot her own food. So, I mean, there was history like that.
Would you say that there, I don't know how to word the question. Would you say that this is a place where you really have to have your wits about you to live?
Absolutely.
Especially when you were growing up.
Yes, especially. I mean, it still has quite a touch of that wildness, but when I grew up there, I hate to say, but I became a rattlesnake killer with a short stick because I was terrified by rattlesnakes, because Mother said they would kill you.
Sure.
And she would shoot them with her gun, and they were all over our place. We'd see maybe 20 a summer.
Wow.
Because we had water, we had animals, we had a garden.
Yeah.
So that they were drawn there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I many times spotted a rattler and jumped over it while I was running barefoot.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, and at the end of the day, they were here first, you know.
They were here first, right. I don't kill them now. I just stay out of their way.
So now you have this new book that you're coming back to the Yucca Valley, Pipes Canyon, and Joshua Tree area to do some readings and talk about. Can we talk about that a little bit? The book itself. So it's your memoir.
My first memoir.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. First one. Everything else, well, they've been historical novels, but they've incorporated the wild, but they were fictionalized in a lot of ways. I mean,
but drawing on your experience, sure.
Right. So this one is actually about my experience, and it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. So much is not in it. I just enjoyed writing it and telling the stories, and it's me trying to weave a thread that made sense through my life. You can see that it doesn't always make sense.
And that's an important message for people, because we're always trying to make sense of everything. And if we would just let go and realize that it's just not going to, we'd save ourselves a lot of suffering, probably.
Right. I guess I never expected it to. Sure. And my mother, I don't let her off the hook in this memoir, but she did do one really important thing for me, and that is tell me that I could do or be anything I wanted to.
That's important.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah. And my 8th grade teacher telling me that too bad so much intelligence is wasted on a girl, and other such things of that era.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's why I wasn't surprised. I knew I'd go back to school. I just didn't know when,
When you're in town, I think I have all of the dates here. We've got you at the Black Rock Nature Center at 7 p.m. on October 4th. And then on Saturday, October 5th, you are going to be gracing the Sun Alley stage with Space Cowboy Bookstore, and that's at 4 o'clock. And if you're listening, this will be all in the show notes or on the website, so you can check it out if you miss it here in the conversation.
There is
and then on Monday the 7th, you'll be doing Kip's Desert Book Club out at the Palms in Wonder Valley at 7 o'clock. and a couple of other venues, it says. So I'm sure that when the press releases in the High Desert Star, or you'll be in touch with me so I can put them in my weekly column in the High Desert Star, we can make sure all that gets out there so people come and meet you and hear your story.
Well, I thank you. It's hard to get me shut up when I'm started telling stories.
That's okay. But what we're going to do right now is, before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to choose 4 numbers between 1 and 50. And the answers to the questions will be put out on Patreon for my Patreon subscribers who so generously support the podcast. Why don't we go ahead and hear what those 4 numbers are from you?
Okay. 4, 29. I can't do that. It's over 50. 34.
Okay.
And 15.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read them, and then we'll come back on the other side and have you answer them, just so folks know what you're going to be answering. The first question will be, what was the last gift you gave someone? And then we'll ask you, was there a trait that you recognized in yourself at a young age that you still use or has led you to a particular vocation? What is your favorite go-to feel-good meal? And last is, any tattoos? Why or why not? I don't think we've answered that one yet, so that's awesome that you chose that one. So again, Susan, I want to thank you so much for being here today. If you're in the Joshua Tree area, let's get out and support Susan and see her either out at Black Rock Nature Center, Space Cowboy Books, or Kip's Desert Book Club. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
If you didn't get a chance to write down those dates and locations for Susan's upcoming visit to the Morongo Basin, I will repeat them again during the closing here. So grab yourself a pen and paper while I talk about something else, which is that I'm excited to tell you that I will be the featured speaker for October's Old Schoolhouse Lecture Series on Friday, October 11th at 7 p.m. It's sponsored by the Desert Institute at Joshua Tree National Park and the 29 Palms Historical Society. The lecture is held at the Old Schoolhouse Museum, which is located at 6760 National Park Drive in 29 Palms, and the lecture is open to the public and costs $5 per person at the door. There's also an optional dinner with me at 5 o'clock at the 29 Palms Inn. Reservations are limited, and attendees are responsible for their own meal. If you're interested in the dinner, you can RSVP to Program Coordinator Kevin Wong by calling 760-367-5537. Again, Kevin's information is 760-367-5537, and that's if you want to RSVP to be one of the folks to attend the dinner with me at 29 Palms Inn. And Kevin asks that you RSVP by October 9th so that they can let the restaurant know. And even if you can't make it to dinner, I would love to see you out there and meet you if we haven't met. Okay, and those dates again for Susan Lang are Friday, October 4th, 7 p.m. at the Black Rock Nature Center in Yucca Valley. Saturday, October 5th at 4 p.m. at Space Cowboy Books, or rather probably the stage at the Sun Alley Shops, but if you get to Space Cowboy Books, you'll be able to find her right away. And Monday, October 7th at 7 p.m. at the Palms out in Wonder Valley. And that event is part of Kip's Desert Book Club. If you're enjoying this podcast, I would appreciate you adding a review on the podcast platform you're listening from, or if you listen from SoundCloud, click the little heart to like it or leave some comments about your favorite part of the episode there. And here's my friend Jean-Paul from Space Cowboy Books to tell you a little bit about his science fiction podcast, Simultaneous Times.
Science fiction stories and interviews blasting straight out of the Mojave Desert and beyond. Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times Podcast. Free to stream on your favorite podcast player. Find out more at spacecowboybooks.com and be sure to visit our store in Joshua Tree, California.
And if you come to the Space Cowboy Books event with Susan Lang, look for Jean-Paul and thank him for all of the events that he puts on for free there at that location. And they also do free books for kids. So they do a lot for the community. So be sure and say thank you to Jean-Paul. Or say merci, Jean-Paul. I'll see you back here next week. Thanks so much for listening.